Hi and welcome to this DCP Web Blender 2.8 fire tutorial. So in today's tutorial we'll be creating a fire simulation which looks similar to this. Okay, so the first thing we should do is open up Blender. Let's go ahead and do that, and we'll click on General here and we'll click on the cube and delete it. So hit the delete key and then we'll go to File, Save As, and I've already got a folder set up here, so I'm just going to call this Fire Text-01 and we'll click Save. So let's middle mouse click and pan around so the X and Y is like this. We'll press Shift A and we're going to insert a text object, and we want to hit the tab key on our keyboard. So we're going to edit mode. You can select edit mode here as well, or you can hit the tab key. We'll delete this. I'm going to type in fire, so you can type in anything you like, it's entirely your choice. I'm going to type in fire and I'm going to click on the object data down here for this text, and I'm going to click on the font and I'm going to set the size to 4. So you can set it to a smaller or larger size, it's entirely your choice depending on what you've typed in. And we want to change the font, so let's go ahead and let's open up our web browser here and we'll go to this website and we'll download this font. I've already picked a font I like, so I'll put a link to this font in the YouTube description. I'm going to click download, and then we also want to download a HDRI map, so I'll put a link to this HDRI map in the YouTube description as well, and we'll click download 4K. So links to both these fonts and the HDRI map you'll find in the YouTube description. So let's minimize this, and in this folder we've got a fonts folder here, so let's drag this font into here and we'll right click and we'll extract it here, and we can delete this folder. We can pretty much delete everything but leave the TTF file here, that's the font itself, and then with the HDRI map we'll drag that into this folder here. We can close down the browser. Let's close this folder for now and we'll go back to Blender and we'll click on this text, and then we'll go to we're in the font section here, so underneath regular we'll click the open folder, go to the font and select this font and click open. Now you can see the font has changed. We're going to go to geometry here and set the extrusion to like 0.4. So I'm setting it to 0.4, so it's like that sort of thickness. It's up to you. And then the depth I'm going to set it to, let's see, we only want a small bit of bevel on this, so the bevel for is going to be set to 0.02. It's going to have a little slight rounded edge around the edge. That will look nice. So that's our text pretty much done, but we just want to center it. This is called the origin point, this little orange dot right here, and we want to center this text on that origin point. So go to object, set origin, geometry to origin. That will center it out. So when we rotate this text using the rotation tools later, this will rotate on this center point, so this is good for us. So now we want to rotate this text, so have it facing towards us. So let's go and click on the object here, and in the object we want to set the rotation on the X to 90 degrees. Now it's facing us, but we want to move it up a little bit, so let's click on the move tool and then press number 3 on our keyboard. That takes us into the right orthographic. If we zoom in a little bit with our mouse, we can click on this blue arrow and we'll drag it exactly 1 square block above the floor, or this green line for now, because we may put a floor, maybe we won't, I don't know yet, but we'll work it out. So let's go to file, save as, and we'll set it to let's set it to version 2. So we've got version 2 now, and we want to now add a HDRI map. So let's go to the shading up here, shading. When we click on shading here, we want to go into the world settings. So we see a this is a the world output and a background here, and we want to press Shift A and insert a mix shader and drag it between these two. So we've got the background connected like this to the world output like this, you can see, yeah. Then we're going to press Shift A and insert another background, and we're going to drag that to the shader at the bottom here. And then we want to add a environmental shader, right? So let's go to environmental texture. So let's press Shift and A, texture, environmental texture here. Then we want to do Shift A, vector mapping, and then Shift A, and we want texture coordinates, and then finally Shift A input, and we want a light path here. So to connect the generated to the vector, this vector to this vector here, and then we're going to connect the is camera array all the way over to the factor over here, like this. Now we can click the open button here, and we'll go to the HDRI folder. Where is it gone? Here it is, and we'll select this HDRI map we downloaded and click open, and we should see, we need to click render view here, render, and it doesn't really look very good because we need to apply a material to this text. So this is like the lighting that will be applied, but the text doesn't have any material applied to it, or the material isn't very good. It has actually no material. So let's go to file, save as, and save it as version 3, and we'll click on this text, and this time we're going to go to the object data, so or the object settings, and right now this doesn't have any material, so we're going to click new, and in the material we're going to name it to fire text. So give it a good name, and in here you can see the principal shader. So you don't really need to do much with this, but we're going to set the metallic all the way up, set the specular all the way down, and set the roughness to around let's see, 0.140. So it still isn't looking right, so there's something wrong here. Let's have a look. Metallics all the way up. This is all good. So there's something wrong in our world settings. Let's just check. Something doesn't look quite right here. Let's just save this. Okay, something ain't right here. So let's open, select the HDRI map, and open it again. That seems okay. Let me just remove this camera here a second. Generate to vector, vector to vector. Okay, so let's connect the is camera. Let's connect the is camera back to the factor over here, and we forgot to connect this color to the color of the background here at the top. So we need to connect these together. Now you can see the lighting being applied from the HDRI map on this text, and it's looking nice, isn't it? It's looking good. That's what we want. So it's just this part wasn't connected properly, so we forgot to do that. You can click on the background down here and set it to like a black background or a really dark color, or you can leave it white. It's entirely your choice. In this example, we're going to set it to like a black color. So we're going to have fire coming out of this, and we want to see that fire on this black background. Okay, let's go to the layout. We can go into render view now, so we can see this in render view, and we're going to press number 7. Number 7 takes us into the top view, and what we want to do is duplicate this text, and we're going to use the duplication text to generate the fire, because we want to keep this text as it is, because that's going to be like a visual representation of the text, right? So we want 2 copies of this. So we'll select this text and press Shift A. We'll press Shift and D, and then hit the Enter key. So when we press Shift and D, we'll have a duplicate copy of this text, and it's called text 001. So this first one, let's call this text main, and this other one, let's call it text, this one here, text 001. Let's call this one text fire. So we'll rename it to text fire, and we want to just change it. We want to change its width here. So let's go to the settings here, and in the scale, I believe it will be on the z-axis. We want to set it to like around 0.4, and then we want to click on this and drag it so that it sits in between, so it's stacked in between this other text like this, just like this. So now we want to get some fire going, right? So let's go to file, save as, and let's save it as version 4 or version 4. Let's save this. Okay, so let's set up a basic fire simulation, then we can play around with the settings to improve the fire. So we want to make sure the text fire is selected here, and we're going to go to object, convert to a mesh object. We have to convert it to a mesh before we can emit fire from it. So let's do that first. So now it's actually behaving as a mesh object. We can go back to object, quick effects, and then apply quick smoke. So what happens there is Blender will create this this box, and this box is called the domain, the smoke domain. It's written here, smoke domain, and we want to click on the smoke domain, and we want to go to the physics settings. And for now, let's see. In fact, we'll leave that for the minute. Let's go to text and fire, or this text fire here, and go to its physics settings, and let's set it to fire here. Fire. And if we were to click play, we won't really see anything. But if we go into like solid view, we'll see this fire being emitted out, right? So that's in solid view or wireframe, yeah? Now, what we want to do, let's go to file, save. We want to press number 7. So number 7 will take us into the top view, and we want to scale out this domain. So let's pause it for a second, and we want to click on this smoke domain, and we want to scale it out on the height, on this y-axis. So let's press S to scale and then Y, and we'll scale it out on the y-axis. So that almost becomes like a box shape like this. So it's pretty much, we want to rotate this text, so we want to make sure there's enough space to rotate the text within the smoke domain. So we'll press S to scale just on its own, and we'll scale it out a bit more like this. Something like this, and we can middle mouse click. And now we should be able to rotate this text around. And in fact, let's press number 7 and we'll scale it out a bit more. Let's scale it out a bit bigger. Something like this. You can see the size. We've got enough space to rotate around this text. It should be good. It should be good. So let's click play. Let's go back to the first frame and click play. And we can see this fire being emitted. So the first thing we want to do is go to the text fire here, and we want to change a few settings in here. So the flame rate we're going to set to 1.8, and the initial velocity we're going to set that to also 1.8. Set these to 1.8. The surface we'll leave at 1.5 for now, and pretty much everything else in here I think we're going to leave alone. And then we're going to go to the smoke domain, and we want to, let's see, in the field weights we want to set the gravity down. Let's bring the gravity down, and let's set the temperature difference to 0. So now you can see the fire is just basically, it's almost static, you can think, right? It's not moving, it is pretty much static fire because we set the temperature difference to 0 here. So what we want to do now is let's set the time scale in fact to around 1.5. This will just speed things up a little bit in the animation, right? And we're going to press Shift A, and we're going to insert a force field, and we want to insert turbulence first. So now you can see the flames are moving a little bit, right? There's a bit of movement in here, but this field is not very powerful. So let's set its strength to around 40, and now you can see the flames start to move. You can see the smoke being emitted as well. You can see that, right? Here, fire and smoke, that's what we want. So we can also play around with a few of the other settings in here. So what we can do is let's press Shift A, and we'll insert a vortex as well. And with the vortex, let's go to the vortex. So this one is turbulence, so we should name it turbulence, and this one is the vortex. Vortex, and then we can increase the vortex to make these flames sort of rotate around. Can you see they're moving around like this now, right? They've got some motion to them. You can play around with these settings. You can really experiment with these flames. But if you go to render view, you'll notice in render view you won't actually see anything. So let's go to file, save, and let's go to the render settings here, and we need to turn on volumetric. Now you can start to see, really what you're seeing is a combination of the fire and the smoke combined together. So you don't really see the fire. We're going to sort that out in a moment. But what we'll do is open up the volumetrics, and we'll set it to 4 for now, the tile size. In fact, we should really set it to 2. 2 is going to give us much better resolution, right? 2. And we'll leave the rest of the settings, but we should turn on volumetric shadows for now as well. and Blender will start to slow down. You can see the frame rates are starting to drop because it's doing a lot of calculations on the fly. So let's set our end frame to 120. So this will just speed things up a little bit. And next we want to apply a material to this fire. Okay, so let's go ahead and open up the shader again. So we'll go into the shadings. So what we actually need to do is click on the smoke domain and then go over to the shading here and go to the object here. And if we zoom out a little bit here, we can find the principal volume for this smoke, and we want to apply a material to it or some effects to it to improve this visual of this fire and smoke. So the first thing we'll do is press Shift A and insert an input, which will be an attribute. So it's attribute, and we want to target the flame. So type in FLAME, all lowercase. Make sure you type it in all lowercase here, flame. And we want to change the color of this fire. To do that, we're going to use a converter color ramp here, and we want to target the emission, right? So what we will do is we will add a shader first. So let's go to shader and add shader and drag it here like this, and we want to target the emission. So we want to go to shader emission. So we have an emission shader here, and we'll connect the emission to the shader up here, and we'll connect the color to the color down here, and we'll connect the factor to the factor here like this. Okay, so inside here we can click the plus sign. When we click the plus sign, we'll add another little handle here, and we can drag this handle towards the white handle at the end here, and you almost want them overlapping. Let's zoom right in here. You can see they're very, very close together, and we'll click on the, make sure this one's selected, the one inside. We'll click here and we'll change the color to some sort of orangey, fiery type color, right? Something like that. And then we will click the plus sign again, and we'll drag it over to this side. And this is really down to your own preferences now, what colors you choose. So I'm going to choose something of a slightly lighter color, like this. So this will be our fire color, this sort of orangey type shade. Now what we can do also is add a math multiplier in here, right? So if we go to let's see, we want converter math, and inside here we'll do a multiply, and we'll connect the factor to the top one here like this, and we'll connect that value to the strength here, and then we can increase this strength or decrease it. You can play around with the settings. For now we're going to set it to around let's say around 40 here. So we've got fire and smoke going now. It doesn't look too good though, does it? It looks a bit pixelated and blocky, so we'll just sort that out. Let's go back to the layout, and in the layout we need to change a few settings, but let's go to File, Save As, and save it as version 5. Okay, so a couple of quick things to note. If we were to click on the fire text here and go to the physics settings, there's a few ways that we can control this fire. We want to have some control over it. So the first thing to note is that this surface is going to determine how much fire and smoke is being generated. So if I go back to the first frame and set this to like 0.5 and then click the play button, you'll see some fire and smoke, but there'll be a lot less. It won't be as much fire and smoke as it would be if I were to set this to 1.5, and then you can almost see that there's going to be more fire and smoke, right? It's going to emit more fire and smoke. So the greater the value here, you can see more fire and smoke will get generated. So you can play around with these settings, and you can increase or decrease that. And this is a good way to control how much fire and smoke is being generated during our animation. So let's set this back to 1.5. The other way I normally control the fire and smoke is via the smoke domain. So if we click on the smoke domain itself, we've got this option here to dissolve. So if I tick that off, and right now it's set to 5, right? So if I were to set this to a lower value, basically the fire and smoke will dissolve quicker. if I set this to a greater value like 300 for example, you'll start to see smoke now. Can you see the smoke? So I think actually this value here is controlling the smoke dissolve rather than the fire dissolve itself. So you can see there's a lot of smoke now, and as I set this value to a lower number like 10, the smoke will decrease because it's fading out a lot quicker. So this is the way I think we're going to control the smoke. And then in the text fire here, the surface is where we're going to control how much fire. So we're going to use both of those in our animation sequence. So at the moment we've got 120 frames, and obviously, you know, this fire is looking a bit blocky and it's not looking that impressive. You can see it from the top. You can almost see like the jagged edges. It doesn't look great, but when we're working in Blender, it's worth working in at a low resolution, and then increasing the resolution when we come closer to finalizing our animation sequence. Because we set all of these settings to a very high resolution, Blender will start to slow down. It will be very sluggish and it will be very difficult to work with. So that really depends on the power of your machine. By no means my machine is very powerful, but at the same time you'll just find it a lot easier to work like this. So we need to think about animation sequence, and really what I want to try and do is have the camera fly towards this text file. I want to do a few things. So let's go back to the first frame. Let's go to our first frame here, and sometimes in Blender you'll notice that you'll still see fire on the first frame. It shouldn't really be there. It's because we need to bake in the settings properly. So once we've baked the settings, you won't really see fire here on this first frame. Baking I'll explain in a moment, but we've got 120 frames to work with. Let's do one thing. Let's go to the output. In the output settings, we want to set this to 30 frames a second. Let's set it to 30 frames a second. So we've got 120. That gives us 1, 2, 3, 4 seconds worth of animation, right? So we need to think what we're going to do within them 4 seconds. And we may increase this, I think. We may increase it to 180. So that gives us 6 seconds to work our animation, whatever we want to do within that animation sequence. Maybe that's a bit too much. Let's set it to 150. So we set our end frame here to 150. That gives us exactly 5 seconds. And that should be enough to do our little animation sequence. Let's go back to the physics settings here. And remember, this surface is going to control the fire. So what we want to do is insert some keyframes. So I'm going to use my mouse wheel to zoom a little bit into this timeline. I'm just rotating the mouse wheel up just to zoom in a little bit. It just makes our life a little bit easier. And we want to work out what we're going to do. So sometimes it's worth thinking about the animation before you actually go ahead and do your keyframing. So more than likely, I want the camera to fly towards this text file. And as it's flying towards it, we'll probably rotate the text, and we're probably going to rotate it twice. On the first rotation there won't be any fire, and then on the second rotation we're going to show fire, and then as it's getting towards the end, the fire is going to fade out, and then the camera's going to zoom in a bit closer and show this text, right? So maybe we should get our camera kind of roughly where we want it to be at the beginning. I think it's not so important right now, but I want it to be quite forward facing like this, maybe at a slight angle, something like this. So we can just about see the top of the text. Let's sort out our keyframes, and then we can sort out the camera animation afterwards, because this actual text is not going to move in terms of backwards or forwards, left or right. It's only going to rotate. One thing we want to do is just make sure we click on the smoke domain. Let's just have a look from the top, and we've got enough space to rotate the text in here, so that should be fine. Really, we should parent these objects together, the smoke emitter and the text as well, because then we can rotate one object and it will rotate both of them together. So what we'll do is we've got the text fire and text main here, yeah? So let's go ahead and click on the text fire first. So click on that one first, hold down the shift key, and then click on the text main. So you've selected both of them. Then move your mouse cursor into the viewport, and then press Control and P, Control P, and then select object here, object. What we should really do is go to File, Save As, and save it as version 6. So whatever work we've finished on version 5, we want to have that separate, and all this new stuff we do in version 6. So let's click Save. Now in theory, what you'll notice, one thing you'll notice is that your your text file has disappeared. It's not disappeared, it's been parented, so it sits in a almost like a subfolder. You can think of it like that, the structure. You can see text file is here and it's indented, it's sitting inside of the text main. So when I click text main and I click, let's say, the rotation tool, as I rotate, it's going to rotate both the text file and the main text itself. It's going to rotate both of them. As you're rotating this, if you rotate it to an angle like this, you can just press Ctrl and Z to undo that rotation. So really now we can rotate this one object and it will rotate both elements, the file and the text together. So that just saves us having to animate both elements. We've parented them together so they, whatever one does, the other one will do. Let's click back on the move tool. Let's rotate back around to the front of the object, and we want to control this fire. You can see that the fire is not showing now in this first frame. So we want to control this fire. What we will do is go to the physics settings for the text file, and we're going to use keyframes, right? So let's let's hit this record button first. So hit this record button. So whatever actions we perform next, they'll be recorded as keyframes. But we have to use the letter I, right? Remember to use the letter I on your keyboard. I for India, right? I inserts keyframes. So what we want to do is insert a keyframe from this surface. So we're going to move our cursor over this 1.5 value and then hit the letter I. When we do that, this will turn this sort of yellowy color, and then you'll see a keyframe gets inserted here. So for the first second, let's think about it, right? The camera's going to fly in. We'll probably fly in up to around just over a second, right? So something like 40 frames, yeah? So just over 1 second. Then we'll do some spinning of the text. Let's say 150, that'll be 110. So 110 to 140, let's see, 4812. So that's almost like 3 seconds, just under 3 seconds. 1, 2, 3, that should be enough to spin the text and show the fire. And then we're going to fade out and do some other camera work at the end. So that should work out pretty well. Yeah, that should be pretty good. So we might even rotate this text at the beginning here on these frames. I'll think about that. Maybe we should we'll do it this way. Let's go to frame 30. We'll do it on frame 30. So that's 1 second. Now let's do frame 40. I prefer frame 40. Let's save this. Okay, so first keyframe is done. On frame 40, we're going to move our mouse cursor back to here and press the letter I. And that inserts a keyframe. This orange bar represents that there's no difference between this keyframe and this keyframe. But that's not true. We want to go back to the first frame. So let's click this arrow here. That takes us right back to the first frame. And we're going to set the surface to 0. So this is now 0. And as it's moving towards this frame, it's going to generate some fire, right? So it's not abrupt anymore. It's building up. It's building up towards that fire. And really, on this frame, we probably don't want to see the fire either. So what we're going to do is click here, and we're going to set this to, we might set it to a really low value like 0.2. So let's set it to 0.2. And if we go back, we'll start to see the flames just about appear, right, on 0.2. So by the time we've done our spinning of our text and moving our camera, whatever we're going to do, let's think about this. Maybe on this frame, we'll set it to 0 as well, actually. Let's set it to 0 here. So between these frames, there's going to be no fire. Then we get to here. And we want to insert a keyframe again, right? So probably what we would do, let's see, from 40 to around, where are we? Let's go up to 110. So from 40 to 110, we're going to press I. In fact, what we might do is get the fire going a lot quicker, right? So let's go to frame 60. On frame 60, we'll press the letter I, and we're going to set this to 1.5. So the flames are going to be produced quite quickly here across this part here. So let's click the play button here, play. So we should see no fire and smoke, and then the fire starts to get generated here on this frame, right? And it will continue to be generated. But we want to control the fire at the end. So what we will do is go to frame, let's see, 40. So on 110. So on this frame 110, we want to insert a keyframe here. So let's press the letter I and we'll insert a keyframe. So for this duration, the fire and smoke is generated. Then we want to go to frame 130. Let's set a keyframe here. Let's insert a keyframe here. And for this part, this is where the fire and smoke is being started up, and on this part is where we want to let's see, 60 to 110. That gives us 90. So maybe what we'll do, no, that should be fine, it's just over 1 second. We want to make this a little bit longer, maybe to 120. So on this keyframe, let's left click here, right click on this keyframe, and then left click on it and drag it to 120 here. 120. Okay. So that gives us at least 2 seconds of fire and smoke here. And then we'll go to this frame here and we'll click it and drag it to 140. And then on frame 140, we want to set the, let's set the keyframe here. So let's right click here on this 140 and set this keyframe to 0. Okay, so that's roughly the sequence, and I think what we would do is add an extra 10 keyframes. So let's set this to 160. So we've got 160 here. So we should have a pretty even sequence, and that should be fine. Let's just click the play button and see how that works. So no fire and smoke. The fire and smoke will get generated. It will stay static or generate that fire and smoke for that duration, and then it should fade out towards here, right? So let's just check that. See, you can see it starts to fade down here, but it will take a little bit of time for it to fully fade out, and then we want to control this smoke, right? So we'll go to this keyframe here, because this is where the fire and smoke starts to be generated. So on this keyframe, in fact, what we'll do is we'll go to the first keyframe, the very first one, first frame, and we're going to go to the smoke domain here. And in the smoke domain, what we'll do is press the letter I on this dissolve here. So right now it's set to 10, which is fine. So let's leave it on 10, and we'll move to, I think it's frame, we have to check. So let's click on text and fire. So it's on frame 40. So let's go to frame 40 here. This is where it starts to get generated. So let's go to the text, the smoke domain, and then it goes to frame 60. So at frame 60 it's at full pelt, right? So let's go to here. On frame 40 we'll go and press the letter I here, and then on frame 60 we're going to press the letter I here on the dissolve as well, but set this to 300. And then on frame 120, I believe it is, let's go back to the text and file. We can see on frame 120, that's where we want to insert another keyframe here for the smoke domain dissolve. So let's press the letter I here, and we'll leave it at 300. And then on frame 140, we want to set this value. So press the letter I to insert a keyframe and set the time here to 0. So that should fade out now, and then we've got a little bit of space at the end to do something with the camera if we want to do anything. So really these keyframes are matching together now. You can see like they're matching. Each one is controlling a different part. This one's controlling the surface, and on the smoke domain we're controlling the dissolve here. Let's set this to 0. I think we can set it to 0. 1 is the lowest number here we can put. So if we untick the record button and go back and click play, in theory we should see that fire and smoke fade out. It may not be perfect, but yeah, it's going to be a little bit tricky to see because we're baking this in real time. But if we use our mouse, we should see it. Yeah, we can see, look here, by here it's all faded out, and then it's going to fade right out here. So when we bake this, it will be a bit clearer to see. So what we want to do now is let's just go to file, save as. Let's click the plus sign, save it as version 7, and we should really just sort out our basic camera animation, and then we can rotate this text finally, then we can increase the resolution, and then we can check out what a few test frames are going to look like. So we want the camera to fly towards this fire in text, and we want it to rotate. So let's sort out the camera first. So let's move our object to roughly where we want it to be in terms of the viewport. So we'll set it roughly. Maybe what we'll do is press number, I think it's number 1. So if you press number 1 will take you into the front orthographic, and we're just going to hold down the shift key in the middle mouse button just to pan it a little bit, something like this, and then press Control Alt and 0. Control Alt 0 will bring the camera. This is the camera here, this little dotted line. So let's click on the camera. So we'll click on the camera, you can see the dotted line here, or this orange line box. That's showing what the camera sees right now. We want to get the camera into a slightly better position. So let's go ahead and click on the object data, and rotation's fine. So on the y-axis, that's going to move the camera backwards and forwards. So let's move it to -20. So roughly -20, and in fact we'll bring it back a little bit more. Let's set it to -30 for now. The X location we should set to 0, so that will center it out. And then the Z location is going to be like the height, right? So I reckon something like around here should be fine. It's like 2.5, something like that. So it should be okay. Now we can move the camera forward, and maybe we'll do a bit of animation on that camera. So first of all, we just want it to fly forward, and maybe it will raise up a little bit and look down towards the top of this text slightly. So let's go ahead and insert a keyframe. So let's hit the record button, and then move over to the location and press the letter I, and then move over to the rotation and press the letter I. And if you remember, if we click on fire text, we've got up until frame 40 here, and on frame 40, that's where our smoke starts to be emitted, right? So maybe what we'll do is move the camera between these 2 frames towards the text, raise the camera up, and then from here all the way down to here we'll rotate the text. So I think we do it that way. I think it'll be better. So let's go back to the camera. All we need to do is remember frame 40. So let's move to frame 40, and we can do whatever we want between this duration. So let's hit the letter I again, here and here, and that inserts the keyframes. And what we will do is on the y-axis, we're going to move the camera forward a little bit to around here, and we want to raise the camera up. So let's move the camera upwards a little bit, and then we want to rotate it downwards. So let's set it to around 80. Let's set it to around 75 degrees. 75 degrees, and then raise the camera up a little bit. I think 75 is a bit too much. Let's set it to around 80, and then let's bring that down a bit to around here, and let's bring it forward a bit more. You just play around with the settings. There's no golden rule here. Let's try and get them to like even numbers. 21. Oops, -21. That should be okay. So now our camera will do this right here. You can see it's like moving towards this text like this. Then on frame 40, all of a sudden this fire will start to generate, right? This fire. So what we will do, let's go to File, Save, and between frame 40 and let's check text fire and frame 120. So between frame 120 and 140, that's where the on 140, that's where the text or the fire stops, right? So between those durations, we're going to spin this text, and we're going to spin it this direction. So we just need to remember frame 140. So let's go to the let's go to the camera. Let's think about this. So camera, really we don't need to do much with the camera, probably up until frame 100 and let's say around 120. Let's see, on frame 120, that's where the fire is at its max, right? And then it's going to fade out here. So for maybe 120, maybe we do a slight camera movement between here and here, just something. We want it to be a bit dynamic. So let's go to frame 120, press the letter I here, and press the letter I here. So we insert the keyframes, and we're going to move the camera just slightly. So maybe we'll move it in slightly. So let's see, on the y-axis, let's bring the camera in slightly, and let's drop it down slightly. Let's try and get it centered out. Only a small amount of movement between here and here, and then what we might do is between 120 and 160. Let's move to frame 160. Let's insert a keyframe here and insert a keyframe here, and maybe we'll end it on an angle. So we'll move the camera closer in and we'll rotate it on the z-axis. So let's rotate it around this way, something like this, and let's move it on the x-axis across, and we'll rotate it a bit more. Let's rotate it around this way. Let's do it to around -30, and then we'll move this across here. We want to bring it in closer, right? So there's a few different ways to set up the camera. I kind of like doing it this way. You've got a bit more control. There's a few different ways. So let's leave it like that. Let's go to File, Save, and if we go back, untick the record button and click play, we can see roughly what's going to happen here. So that'll be our basic animation, right? So let's go back to the first frame. Now we can rotate this text. So we need to go ahead and click on the text main. So this is text main. And between the first frame and frame 40, we don't want to rotate anything. So let's hit the record button and go to the rotation here. We don't need to do anything with the location. The text never really moves from its location, it only gets rotated. So let's press the letter I on rotation, go to frame 40 and press the letter I on rotation. And then we'll go to frame 140 and press the letter I on rotation, and then go to frame 160 and press the letter I on rotation. So we've got our keyframe set out, and the only keyframe that needs rotation on it is 140, and we just need to decide roughly how much are we going to rotate this by, and we want to rotate it on the z-axis. Let's see, so should we rotate it once? 360 from 40 all the way down to 140. That's 100 frames, so that's almost 3 seconds. 1, 2, 3, just under 3 seconds. So I think once, twice, we can rotate this twice. So 360 will be 720, right? 720. Let's just double check. 360 times 2 is 720. 720 here. So that's fine. So this text will rotate twice now. Should in theory. Let's go and check that. Click the play button. Here. Okay, so on that last frame, what we need to do, let's go to the very last frame here. Let's hit the record button, and on this z-axis we need to set this to 720 as well. So between these 2 points, it will stay at 720 rotation, so it's not rotating back at the end here. So that should be fine. Now we can go ahead and improve the actual file itself. So let's go to File, Save. Let's go to File, Save As, and set it to version 8. Let's save that. Let's click on the smoke domain. Let's just check this smoke domain. Click on smoke domain, click here, set the resolution divisions to 90 here. Go down and scroll down and select high resolution here. So I normally set this to a value of 2. I would not recommend setting higher than 2 because it can take a really long time to bake out the file. This is going to take a bit of time to bake, and I'll explain what that is in a moment. But we set the resolution divisions to 2, and we're going to set the resolution divisions here to 90 and the high resolution here to 2. Let's go to the render settings. And in the render settings, just make sure volumetric is turned on, set the tile size to 2. We'll leave the samples at 64, and then the volumetric shadows, we should probably set this to around, let's see, let's set that to 64 as well. 64 and 64 here. So let's go back to the physics, and inside the physics, we're going to open up this cache. Let's go to File, Save. Make sure you're on the very first frame. And this is the time where you need to go and make yourself a cup of tea, because you're going to click here. But before you click here, you need to click on you need to type in 160 here. So from frame 1 to 160, frame 1 to 160 here is going to bake out the file. Let's click bake here. And now what Blender is doing is just calculating all of the file animation as it's moving across this this sequence. Now what you'll notice is the first set of frames are going to bake quite quickly because there is no fire in those first 40 frames, right? Remember with this is where the camera is moving forward towards the text. Is when it gets to past 40 frames is the baking will start to slow down. So you're going to notice this now. If when we get to frame 40, it's going to start to slow down this timeline down here. This is what I'm watching down here. So as it's doing this, it's going to start to slow down. So you can see it's starting to slow down now. So what we would do actually is on around frame 60, and maybe even before frame 60, we might stop this bake just to test and see what it looks like before we bake the whole sequence. So what I normally do is on around frame, let's say frame 55, I'm going to hit the escape key. So I'll hit the escape key a few times and that will stop the baking. So now it's baked the flames up until that point. You see Blender will start to slow down quite a lot, but now you can see what that fire really looks like. So this is baked at a much higher resolution, yeah? Much higher resolution. So one thing we can actually do now is go back into the shading quickly, and we can actually see what the fire looks like much better now compared to what we were seeing in the low resolution. So you can see like here in the render view, make sure render's turned on, you can actually see what that fire is going to look like. It looks much better now, right? We see it from the top, it looks more like flames. And what we want to do is click here. This turns off overlays. So this just lets you see the render without the viewport without overlays. This option here, turn it off and on. And what we might do is if you click the plus button, let's zoom right in on this color ramp. So if we click the plus button here, we can add in another one of these little handles, and we can click here and we can change the color. So we can start playing around with the colors, and because we've baked at a high resolution, we can really see what's going on now much clearer. It was a bit more difficult to see that in the lower resolution. So look, if you see if you've got the blue here, this blue will be right on the outside edge here. You can see right on the outside edge, or you can have like the blue more towards the middle. You can start to see blue inside the edge here, right around the inside here. You can play around with these color settings now, and you can change them and manipulate them to what you think is going to look good. So you need to really go and experiment with this. You can add as many of these handles as you like, so you can plug as many as you want. You can do whatever colors, but really we want something that looks a bit like fire. So we'll get rid of we'll click on this one here and get rid of it, and we'll click on the blue one, we'll get rid of that as well, and we're just going to stick with like this yellow, and maybe we'll click on this one here. This is going to be more like towards the inside, and we might change that to more of a slightly so you can even go crazy, go purple and pink and all sorts of colors, right? But we want something like around here. I think is going to be good, and maybe on this outside one here, let's turn up the brightness here, and we'll set this to more of a red color around the edge. Now I think that looks much better. So we've got more of a darker red around the edge, and then on the inside you'll note that the color settings here are much lower. That's why it's toned down a bit, yeah? You can change that slightly to you can have greens in there if you want, but really want to stick with like a yellow and a red. I think that's going to look pretty good. One other thing we can do is click on the render settings here and then turn on the bloom. And when we turn on bloom, we need to turn down the threshold. So let's go back into our layout. So we can see it in the layout. We can turn off the overlays here. And the bloom, you can see, is massive, right? We don't want it to be that big. So let's go to the render settings here, open up the bloom settings, and just reduce the radius so we get a bit of a glow around the edge, something like this. Let's say around I think something about 3.366. that's the value I'm using. Then it's got a bit of this glow edge around it, and I think that'll look pretty cool. So we're good to go now. We can go ahead and bake it. Like I said, it's going to take a bit of time to bake all of this out in Blender. So let's go to File, Save. Let's go back. In theory, we should be able to continue our bake from here, but I'm not sure if that will work. So let's see. Let's click Smoke Domain. Let's go to Physics. Let's see, update to all frames. I'm not sure we can do that. Let's see, let's just click bake all dynamics. I don't think it's going to do that, so I think we have to delete the bake. So let's click delete bake here, and let's go back to the first frame. Let's go to file, save, and then click bake here, bake. Now I'm going to pause this video. I'm going to leave Blender baking all of the frames, and once it's all done we can check that quickly, and then we can think about doing that final render afterwards. So let me pause that for now. Okay, so Blender's finished baking out all of the fire simulation. Let's go to file, save as, and let's just go to file, save. And what you'll notice now is Blender's quite sluggish. It's a little bit sluggish and it's slowed down because all of these, if we were to move to these frames here, you'll see that it's all been baked in high resolution now, right? This fire sequence. So if you were to click the play button, it's going to play fairly slow. It's not going to look too impressive inside the viewport here, but we should get a good animation sequence. You can see like the fire starting to fade out here. You just see little whispers of it flowing off. So I reckon this is going to look pretty good. Let's try and go to the end frame here. We can see that that's looking pretty good. We'll press 0. That's what our camera is going to see towards the end. Here you can see the fire. It's going to look pretty cool. So now we just need to render this out. Let's go to the first frame. Let's go to our render settings. Everything in here should be set correctly. Let's go to the output settings. And in the output settings, we need to make sure we've got frame 1 to frame 160. Set it to 30 frames a second. And we're going to click on PNG and set it to AVI JPEG here. And we'll leave it at 90% quality. That should be fine. Let's click RGB here. And then we'll click this open folder here. And we'll go to my desktop. We'll go into this directory. And we'll just click accept here. And then we'll go to render and render animation, or press Ctrl F12. So let's press that now, and Blender will start to render out the first frame. Normally I wait until it's rendered out at least one frame or a few frames. So let's just see and make sure it renders out. So here we can see frame 2, and then it will render out frame 3, and it's got to do 180 of these. So that's going to take a bit of time. So again, I'll pause the video. We'll wait for this to all finally render out, and then we can check the final video animation. Okay, so Blender's finished rendering out all of the 160 frames. So if we close this down, and if we just go to file, save, it's always a good thing to do. On my desktop here, we've got the folder, and inside this folder, we've got the fire and smoke animation video. So let's play that. And let's just set it to looping, and we'll just check this out a few times and see what we think. I think the fire looks really good. You can see how we baked it as high resolution, and we've got all the animation in there. I think the movement's really good as well. Overall, I think it came out pretty well. There was a couple of things I would have probably improved on here. If we noticed that the smoke towards the end really sort of just almost disappears, and that's because we set the dissolve. We should have really dissolved it gradually over a longer period of time. We dissolved it pretty quick, but I think it still looks okay. It's not too bad. I don't know what you think. Hopefully your one came out pretty well as well. It does take quite a bit of time to bake and render out this animation, because you can see it's quite complex and the flames look very realistic, but that's just you know, the way it works. It takes time and energy to create a animation sequence similar to this. So let's see how we'd improve this. So I think you know, I'm pretty happy with this part here. I think the fire looks pretty cool here, and when it gets towards these end frames here, around here, you'll see like the smoke will just disappear around like here between these two. Can you see? Just disappears. And I think that's down to something in our sequence. You know, there's something here that doesn't seem quite right. It should have really faded out that smoke over a longer period. So let's try and see how we would fix that if we go back into Blender, let's go to solid view, and we can see the smoke in here, right? So when it gets to this frame 120, when we go to the next frame, it disappears. So on 100, where is it now? That's 140. Let's go back to this keyframe. Let's see, on 120, 121. So this, we can still see the fire here, the smoke. But when it gets to here, it disappears, right? So something's wrong with the dissolve keyframes here. So let's go to the smoke domain and let's see what happened here. It's set to 1 on here, and on this keyframe it's set to 300. So it does, can you see between this point here, 120 and 140, so there's only like 20 frames in here, so that's less than a second. So in theory, in under a second, that smoke needs to pretty much disappear, and it's under a second, right? It's 30 frames a second, so we've only given Blender a finite amount of time, less than a second, to make that smoke disappear. So if we go from frame 120, we're on, what is it, 300 here, and when we go to frame 21, it will start to reduce. You can see that the numbers are reducing here, and then by the time we get to frame let's see, frame 140, it's set to 1. So this is too short a distance. So really what I would have done to improve this, I would have probably set the dissolve much further down around here somewhere. I would have started the dissolve here. I would have set this keyframe here, I would have set it around here and have the dissolve over a longer period of time. That way the smoke will gradually fade out over a longer period. This is way too short here. So it's not actually, I mean, it still looks okay, but it's not perfect, and we could have improved that. So whenever I do something in Blender, if I see there's a problem at the end of it, I really want to try and show you how I'll go about improving it. I don't want to go and rebake this whole thing. It will just take too long to rebake it all and redo the whole sequence. But overall, it isn't pretty, you know, it's pretty cool. I think it came out quite well. Again, you can use any sort of text in here. It doesn't have to say fire. It could have been your company name. It can be anything you want. Anything you want. One thing you'll note is it's not too bad in here, and we could have got rid of the smoke and just had like the fire like this as well towards you know, throughout the whole sequence. The smoke is kind of an optional thing, right? All you would have done is, if you didn't want smoke, you would have just set the dissolve to a really low number and just left it down on a really low number. I'm pretty sure there's a way to just get rid of the smoke. I need to play around with the fire settings a little bit more and experiment with this a little bit more, but you can see it takes quite a bit of time. I think in my next video I might look at the cloth simulation again. I did one tutorial on that before, but I might look at the cloth simulation one more time. But overall, I think this fire came out pretty well. Hopefully you can go and experiment now, go and create a few different animations. It doesn't take too long to render out. It takes about half an hour to render out these frames, and it takes about 20 minutes to bake it. So it's a bit of time, fair bit of time, but you know, we live and we learn, and that's how we learn new things. So let's go ahead and close this. Let's just check that out. Let's just let it play, because I like this quite a lot actually. I think it's not too bad. What do you think? Hopefully your one came out well. If you want to maybe send me you can actually, what you can do is you can upload your version to Facebook, and if you upload it to Facebook and then send me a link, you can either send me a link on Facebook, you can see I'm on Facebook as well, or you can upload it to YouTube and send me a link. Then I'll put a place of I'll showcase this video on my Facebook page, or I'll put a link in there into the YouTube description. If it looks good, I'll put a link there so people can see your work as well. And you can also share it on Instagram if you feel like uploading it to Instagram. You can find me on Instagram as well, so feel free to share your examples of this animation sequence. I would like to see it as well. I like to see people using my work or these video tutorials and creating something, and it's nice to see what you guys have created afterwards as well. So I'll leave you to go and experiment with that. Let's go ahead and close this down. I know that was a pretty long tutorial, but I like to go through things in detail rather than just brushing over things. I see a lot of tutorials out there where they just don't really explain things very well. They just click on things, and in the end you're not really getting a full understanding of what's going on. I'd rather take the time and explain it in detail, and then that way you get a better understanding. So when you come to create your animation sequences or whatever tutorials I do, I try and explain things in a bit more detail and take a bit more time. So that's the end of this tutorial. I hope you find it useful, and I look forward to seeing you on the next DCP Web tutorial.